Hey, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Thriving Thoughts. I am your host, Dr. Sherri. Oh my gosh, you guys, I have to tell you, when I started this podcast and announced that I would be starting it, I did not have a guest lineup. And my guest today, Desiree Battle, which, by the way, I love her name, Desiree Battle. And the story that she shares with us is all about the battle that she fought when she was feeling alone and how she has learned to overcome those alone spaces and use them. So I just love that. Desiree Battle. Anyway, Desiree asked me a question and she said, hey, how's season 4 shaping up? Do you have enough guests? And I said, I don't have all of season 4 lined up, but I'm confident that God is going to provide the right guests at the right time. My friends, we're on episode 83. God has provided a quality, amazing guest to share a vulnerable, encouraging story with you every step of the way. So I have every confidence that this season is going to be no exception to that. So today's guest, my dear friend, Desiree, I love her heart. I love her story. In this episode, you guys, she gets super vulnerable about what it's like to be alone, to be left alone with a small child and 4 months pregnant and not having any sort of labor or delivery plan, uprooting herself, moving to a new community. You guys, if you're a single parent, if you have ever had these fears about being alone in these most unstable of places, guess what? Desiree shares that every one of her worst fears came true. But she learned to thrive through them. And in today's episode, she is going to share that with you. So here is my conversation with my friend, Desiree Battle. Should actually make a video of bloopers for the show because it would be quite funny.
That would be fun. Yeah, at the end of each season or whatever you release.
Just do a blooper reel instead of a highlight reel. Do a blooper reel.
You remember how it was back in the 80s when we used to have our Friday night shows, and then at the end of the season they used to show the bloopers?
Yes.
I used to love those episodes.
I know. They don't really do that anymore. It's almost like we're not humble enough to do that. I don't know. Anyway, Desiree Battle, welcome back to the show. We are here for a second time, although the listeners and viewers don't know that because they don't know that we had some technical snafus with the first one. And so I'm so happy that we get to have a conversation again. And the reason I'm excited about that is because I don't know where it's going to go now.
I thought about that. Yeah. I thought about that. So it was the first conversation is always so authentic and so genuine, and you can't recreate it.
But we can't recreate or invent this one either because we haven't really talked about it. We're just going to have a conversation like we did last time. And I'm going to start off asking you the same question, but maybe your answer is going to be different. I don't know. It's kind of like all kinds of anticipation here. So Desiree, the theme for this season is thriving alone, meaning, you sharing about a time that you felt alone and what you learned about yourself in the process and how you have used that to grow yourself as a person. So what have you learned to thrive through alone?
Oh my gosh. Still love that question. I get really passionate and emotional when I talk, and it's not like a bad way, but the emotions start to well up and I'm like, I'm going to need tissue.
Oh, okay.
So I always make sure to have some close by.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that you're expecting to go deep. That's what we're all about on this show.
I just know myself at this point. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Wow.
But, I can remember a time when I felt physically alone and emotionally alone and mentally alone. And it was a really strange place for me because I had not recognized the term being alone before. And so if I recall, it was the day my second son was born.
Okay.
And
so that means you have 2 sons.
I do. I have 2 boys. Yep. My oldest was about 7 or 8 at the time.
Okay.
And I was married, but my husband had left when I was about 4 months pregnant. And we had moved to a city that was about 250 miles from my family.
Yeah.
And so it was new territory for me. It was the first time that I was physically alone. and I was facing challenges that I had never faced before alone. And it was a real struggle to just to keep going basically at that point in my life,
Yeah.
just with those
Well,
circumstances.
you probably had anticipated or at least considered the fact that you would go through the birth of your second child with your spouse with you.
Yeah. Yeah, and that to me was always, always my goal. I think that was one of my worst fears was raising children alone and being alone. And I just realized that I had this fear and I didn't have this safety around being alone. And so I kind of held on to it, even though maybe at the time I knew it probably wasn't the best situation for the family
Sure.
or for either of us
Okay.
personally. And so, yeah, I just, I was holding on to the hope that somebody would be there.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But okay, so thank you for saying that and being honest about that, Desiree, because I think a lot of times, particularly as women, I don't claim to know much about the psyche of a man because I'm not one. But particularly as women, I think it's so easy to cling to something
Yeah,
that we had expected or hoped.
absolutely.
And even if it doesn't work out in the way that we thought, like for you example with your husband leaving, sometimes we
Yeah.
clamor for that and we'll take the
Oh gosh.
next best thing instead of
Yeah.
right, instead of like going it alone. But it sounds like in your case you did not do that. Let me ask you this. Did you have the opportunity or even the inkling to want to do that so that you were not alone?
Wow, such a great question. Yeah. Yeah, there was a period of time where he did, offer to come back and want to come
Mm.
back and reconcile.
Mhm.
Um, but for me, I had recognized the cycle. Him getting up and leaving at 4 months pregnant was not the first time that had happened, right?
Okay. Okay.
And so it was recognizing the cycle and
Yeah.
understanding that if I was going to be healthy mentally and physically, if I wanted to raise healthy children, I had to raise them in an environment that was stable.
Stable, yeah.
And so there was an opportunity, right, to not go at it alone. But for
Mhm.
me, it meant that it could have been more dangerous,
Mhm.
more scary, more unpredictable. And at the time,
Oh yeah.
you know, with it just being myself, I was able to, even though it was hard, I was able to sort of give, our life that stability and that control.
Yeah. So I've got maybe a couple of questions for you about that, but you mentioned something that is hugely insightful and I think something that connects with women everywhere, that this wasn't the first time that
Mm,
he had left, right? So let us in on how this time was different than the last.
mm.
Particularly given the fact that here you are 4 months pregnant, and I'm assuming the last time he did this, maybe you weren't pregnant.
Yeah, no, it was a reoccurring thing. It was something that happened very frequently.
Mm-hmm.
We were only married very short time, a year and a half.
Okay.
But for me, I had noticed similar red flags prior to the marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And even I recognized that, people are not perfect and he was not perfect and
Yeah.
there was going to be some sort of struggle,
Yeah.
to get on the same page. But
Yeah.
I was willing to work that thing out. Um, what was your question again, Sherry? I'm sorry.
Well, so the question was, if that wasn't the first time, like, so right now you are like laying yourself bare for me to like dig into. And here's why I am
Oh, go
asking you to
ahead.
do that.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you to be even more vulnerable because that's a
Okay.
place that I went to in my book with regard to my split, was how even though there were red flags before I got into
Hmm.
the relationship, the different
Hmm.
rationalizations that I used
Yeah.
to be able to actualize what I expected or wanted, that's one thing.
Hmm.
But then eventually there was a shift for me, as I'm assuming there must have been for you if this wasn't the first time
Hmm.
that he left, right?
Oh,
So
yeah,
so
yeah.
what was the shift in your mind? Like when did you go, okay, the last time I said yeah, come back, but this time I was like, no way.
No. This time I was like, no,
Yeah.
right?
Not even no way, just
That's
no.
just no. And that's such a hard question, Sherry, because there's so many
Yeah.
things that got me to that
Yeah.
point. Okay, one very thing that I love about my oldest son, right, is that he can articulate emotions in a way that I could not as a child and even struggled with as an adult.
Okay.
And I remember him telling me one time after one of our fights that it made him, his words were that when you guys fight, it makes me uncomfortable, he said, and it makes me sad. And he said
He
that to
said
me, and
uncomfortable.
he said uncomfortable. I can't remember how old he was at the time. And when he said that, it did something to me because I come from that background too, where I was a kid who also experienced some very uncomfortable
Okay.
things. But I was from the generation where kids are seen and not heard.
Yeah.
And so I sat back and shut up
Right.
and internalized all
And
of
you
that.
didn't
And
dare
so when
tell
he,
anybody you felt uncomfortable.
oh no, no. I mean,
No.
it wasn't until well into my 30s when I could even like look back and realize, the impact that it had on me.
Yeah.
And so when he said that at 4, 5, or 6, however old he was, I made it my duty to make sure that I was giving him the best possible life that he could have. And so I recognized that in going back and
Yeah.
forth and having these arguments as small or as big as they blew up
Sure.
to, some of them becoming, very like, physically abusive, very emotionally abusive. I didn't want to subject him
Yeah.
to that in his life. And I knew there was a small window for me
Yeah.
to put that behind us and allow him to see some things that were a lot healthier.
Yeah.
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 And so with the second baby coming into the picture, I wanted to make sure that I remember thinking this, and I'll be very open with you.
Yeah.
This was my exact thought when he left. It was, if I'm going to live to tell this story, I'm going to have to do this alone. And that was my exact thought. And at that moment, I was okay with it because I wanted to live to tell the story.
So, okay. Oh man, I got some goosebumps on me right now, and here's why. Because I think that what you are saying right now extends some grace to women watching who might not have reached that point of certainty that they'll do this and they'll do this alone. That you didn't even have an exact formula, but something shifted in you and you knew it when it did, and it was time. You were ready to listen to
I was
it,
ready.
right? Because
Yeah.
I think a lot of times we can have these, fights with ourselves internally, like, you're so stupid. Why are you doing this? And you know how this is going to turn out. And why don't you just make up your mind? But the grace offering here is when you are ready to hear and believe that, you will. So extend yourself some grace in the meanwhile, that when that clicks, it will click. And that will be your time. That maybe right now is not your time.
It's not your time?
Yeah.
Wow.
What are your thoughts?
Back then I would have never thought about it as that. I don't think I understood the meaning of grace as much
To yourself,
as
particularly.
to yourself.
Yeah.
As much as I believe in God and understood, what his grace and mercy looked like for us, it was non-existent when it came to myself. Yeah. But that is a very good point. And we do have to extend some grace to ourselves in a way that, sometimes we're not maybe able to handle what's on the other side of it. But I would always challenge that.
Yeah.
I would always challenge that because I just believe that if you know something is not right in your heart, and it's a painful experience for you, and you know that it's not going the way that you would see your life going, just to take that leap of faith. And that's what it was for me. It wasn't this type of grace thing. It wasn't something that clicked. It was this notion that anything on the other side of this has to be better than what I'm dealing with now.
So there was a determination for you.
There was.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think on our the last one that recorded, it was like I had to recall who I was prior to this relationship and prior to this situation. At the moment, I looked back and tried to remember, like, who were you prior to this moment where you felt defeated?
Yeah.
And I was, to me, in my own sense, I was a champion. I was an athlete, and a lot of the things like you learn as an athlete, you can take into your life or you can't take into your life. Some of it serves you, some of it
Sure.
doesn't, right? And that sort of thing served me because I was resilient. I was able to bounce back from win or loss, to move on to the next victory or move on to the next race and just
Yeah.
keep going. And I wanted to be like that again. I wanted to be a champion, and I wanted to feel like I was undefeated again in life.
And
Yeah.
so but that is a trait of yours that I would submit. Maybe not a lot of people that comes naturally to them, right? That determination that like, hey,
Yeah.
I've decided and I'm going to move forward with this. And I also agree, and I'm thankful for your challenge to extending yourself grace. I think there's a place for that. And then there's not a place for that, because it's not about extending grace to yourself and giving yourself permission to stay in a defeating situation. That's not what I meant by that. It's giving yourself grace and understanding that if you have decided to do something, but you're having trouble determining to do that thing and following through with it like you did,
Oh, yeah.
to
Yeah.
then extend yourself some grace and go, okay, I might not be ready this time, but I'm going to be ready next time. You know, that kind of
Yeah.
conversation with yourself.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You're right. Those conversations were going on. It was like, this could be the time. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, this could be the time.
Yeah.
We could cut ties now. And I remember, thinking, just second guessing myself a lot and being like, no, you made a commitment. Like, this is what you're supposed to do. And I remember a very good friend of mine said to me, when God provides you a life raft or something along the lines, don't allow somebody to poke a hole in it or something along those lines. It
Okay.
was something like that. And I remember after that, extending the invitation to my husband to join me in Pennsylvania, where I had gotten my new job.
Okay.
And that's what she meant. She meant that I was given a life raft to get out of a very difficult situation. And I was bringing him along with me on this new journey.
Oh,
And so I didn't understand it at the time, but it stayed with me.
That's good.
And I understood it as time went by. Yeah.
That's good. The other thing wow, that's powerful. Yeah. Like, how are we sabotaging our own escape? Our own,
Wow.
not even escape, but foraging forward. Like,
Yeah.
Forging into our future, but yet we're still something's not hanging on to us, but we're hanging on to it.
We're hanging on to it. Yeah, we do.
Yeah, that level of comfort. The other thing that struck me that you said, Desiree, was you said once you had determined to leave, that and to be okay with not like having him come back, and knowing that you've got one son and now you're pregnant with another one, is that you said, and once I had determined, I was okay with it. Even though you said, I didn't know what was on the other side of that, but I was okay with it. So in other words, you had gotten to a place mentally where, and correct me if I'm putting words in your mouth, but where the fear of staying where you were was greater than the fear of going to where you didn't know you were going.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That is, period. The end of story. That's absolutely correct. Yeah. I remember there being this moment after he left that time, because I knew in my head that this was the last time, right? And up until that point, I could feel the fight growing in intensity, and all the while I was trying to kind of just fade into the back, because I knew what was going to happen, right? So I was not trying to amplify it, not trying to make it any more intense than it was. I just tried to be as calm as possible. And when he left, I remember there was this moment of relief, and it lasted for about 30 minutes to an hour, because I was like, this is it. You know what I mean? Like, this is it. This is your moment. And then after that, it was this like fear. It was this, what now? What do we do now? And it was every day, it was just getting up and putting one foot in front of the other, going to that job, looking for a daycare center, figuring out a life that was convenient for us, so that everybody was happy and healthy and mentally, emotionally had everything that they needed.
Yeah. So what strikes me is you had to also have a mental shift to a mindset shift, I'll say, to keep putting one foot in front of the other. I was just reading a book by John C. Maxwell, and one of the things he said is, you have to shift. If you want to grow, if you want to move forward, if you want to achieve the life that you want to achieve, you have to go from either I can't or I think it was I can't. Yeah, he said you have to go from I can't to can I to how can I? So like when you were in this situation, here you are alone, you don't have any resources. You're like, I'm just going to put one foot in front of the other. But you didn't ask yourself, can I do this? You asked yourself, how can I do this? And that's what it sounds like to me. And that's what allowed you to keep putting one foot in front of the other.
Yeah, that's funny that you just even interpret it like that, because there was no answer coming back to me on the other side. It was like, how can I do this? And there was just silence on the other end.
Talk about being alone. Yeah. Yeah.
And people would ask me, they would be like, well, what's your plan when you go into labor? And I literally would say, I don't know. I just believe. I would cut it short and I said, I just believe that God is going to work everything out. And to me, in my mind, that meant I was going to have a healthy pregnancy. I was going to have a healthy delivery. You know, my son would be able to stay in there long enough for maybe a family member to come, you know, drive 4 hours and be with us during that time.
Yeah.
You know, and that was my thinking, right?
Okay.
Because I couldn't bear to think anything else.
So did it work out like that?
No, not at all. All of my worst fears came true that day.
So tell us, you had this vision of how God would pull through for you, and it just didn't happen. So tell us what happened. Tell us how it went down.
Man, so it was 2 days after Christmas. I woke up and I was in that nesting phase. I felt like I needed to clean profusely.
Okay.
And I was down on my hands and knees and I was scrubbing the bathroom floor. And my youngest son comes in and he goes, or my oldest son now, he goes, why are you crying? And I was like, oh, honey, I said, I'm just so tired. And I remember being in so much pain. And at the time, it was just us two living in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
But what was really interesting was that particular day, it was 3 weeks before my due date, I had a friend who had traveled from Atlanta, stopped in Pennsylvania to visit us, on their way to Boston to visit family.
Okay.
Well, they were on their way back getting ready to leave, and I just happened to be going into labor at that very moment. And this friend happened to be my son's godmother.
Okay.
So I said, guys, I'm like, don't leave me here. Just take me to the hospital. I don't think I can make it.
Yeah.
And I got to the hospital, and next thing you know, I'm being wheeled down the halls of the emergency room. They can't find the baby's heartbeat, and I'm being put to sleep. So all of my worst fears kind of came true in that moment, but it was funny because a snowstorm like literally happened. It was a blizzard at the very moment we got to the hospital. So the friends that were there, they could not leave. They were stuck there for at least 3 or 4 days. And my son had somebody to be with who loved and cared for him. And at the time, I was being taught a very necessary lesson by God. And it all kind of worked out in the end. It was just so beautiful how it all worked out.
What was the necessary lesson? Break it down for us.
Yeah, the necessary lesson, and I think you're kind of alluding to this, is that sometimes as women, we put our need, and we have this idea that we can't go it alone, right? And we can't do it alone, and we don't have the strength, and we don't have the resources, and we don't know everything. We can't protect ourselves. We can't. And we hold on to things longer than we have to.
Yep.
And so in that moment, I had put my trust in the fact that other people would take care of everything.
Say that, Desiree.
I couldn't have planned this. There was no labor plan that I could have put together that would have been better than what God established.
Right.
So that very lesson was that if I put my trust in Him, that if I just believe, get up and put one foot in front of the other, He's going to take care of the rest.
Oh my gosh, you just,
blew my mind.
I got chills.
Blew my mind that day.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, it is one of the most humbling and most uplifting lessons ever. To know that, to literally go from, I was just having this conversation with a friend, a colleague the other day, and she said, it's easy to trust when things are going well. It's easy to trust and believe that God is your provider when things are going well. And I argued, I don't think we do trust when things are going well. We don't need to. There's no, what are we trusting in, right? Things are going well. We know when the next paycheck is coming in. We know when the next mortgage payment is getting made or rent payment. We know where the next grocery money is coming from. We know where the next tank of gas is coming from. We don't have to trust anything with that, right? But to have this lesson for God to show us that, here's what I believe is so bold and beautiful about what you said, because it doesn't make sense to people. That level of confidence. Like when you said, when people were asking you, what's your labor plan? And you're like, I don't have one, but I know God's going to take care of it, right? That doesn't make sense to people. And when it doesn't make sense to people, when it doesn't make sense to our reasoning, we start to look a little reckless. Right?
For sure. For sure. I know people were probably like shaking their head at me profusely.
Right.
Like, how could you be so irresponsible? How could you, just throw your whole life to cost, throw your whole life to the wind?
Yeah. And
so many things could have happened wrong that day.
Yeah.
That's the thing. So many things could have happened wrong that day.
And hey, when we were on the phone, when we first met, you mentioned like a little kind of just icing on the cake that God gave you when you were in that situation with the doctor. Can you tell the listeners and viewers about that?
Sure. Yeah. I was telling Sherri that, I was being wheeled down the hallway, and I always tell us, like a funny story. I said, literally I'm on all fours and my butt is in the air. Like I'm butt naked, and I'm
like
just like, no time
vulnerable you could ever be.
Yes. No time to be embarrassed. It's like, whatever. It's like, I may not even live through it at this point. I'm going down the hallway thinking like, so what?
Right. Yeah.
So what they see? So I get into the OR, and there's a Black female doctor there. And at this time, I had not ever had a Black doctor, Black female doctor before. And I was telling Sherri that, all of the tragedies that surround Black women in labor in this country. And certainly that was the thing that was going through in my head.
Like, this is going to be me now.
This is going to be me now. And just to have that advocacy that she was there, it was like this little like icing on the cake that God just kind of dropped it in there. And if you thought that you should be worried, check that out. There's just a little bit of this here for you.
I love that. Oh my gosh.
It's so funny because I remember her saying, she put her hand on my shoulder and she said, are you nervous? And I don't even remember if I answered. She said, don't be. And then she started instructing everybody. She said, all right, people, if we're going to get this baby, it's going to be now. And she started giving orders. And it brought this little sense of relief because I was like, oh, that, Auntie is on it. Like, I could just go to sleep. You know what I mean?
I love that.
Auntie is here.
But that's the other beautiful thing. Like, God just provided for you in spades. I mean, in ways, right? Like, in ways that you hadn't anticipated. You were just asking for a delivery and a healthy delivery. And he's like, but I'm going to give you a little bit more.
That's so true. Because she wasn't my doctor. And the doctor that I had, unfortunately, didn't take the precautions, even though I was a high-risk pregnancy, to know that I was having trouble. I should have been having several ultrasound appointments up until that moment, and I didn't. So thank God that doctor wasn't there that day.
No doubt. Wow. So, okay, this is a lot of alone space, and I want to dive into something after that. But even if we don't get to that, I don't care, because we're on a roll right now, and people need to hear they need to hear us peel back the layers of this a little bit. But the feeling alone, and what did you I always talk about thriving means that you learn about yourself, you grow, you learn something new about yourself, and so I hear that you learned something about God and his provision for you and his value for you. But I
Oh,
wonder,
yeah.
what did he show you? What did God show you in that process about you, about who you
Oh,
are?
gosh. Yeah. So many things. So many things. I had become reliant upon my own skill to
Mm,
sort of get me through things.
mm-hmm.
And I believed that I could outwork myself. You know, I could work myself out of anything. You know, if I
Mm-hmm.
worked hard enough at it, I could make this relationship work.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, if I worked hard enough at it, I could expect people to change. You know, if I worked hard enough at something, I could get, I would reach this level of success that I wanted. And I
Mm,
recognized that I was this sort of doer,
mm-hmm.
right?
You were the
And I
champion.
I was the champion. And I attributed my value and my worth to all of the things that I could do, that I could accomplish,
Oh,
that I could
okay.
fix. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that started a journey for me to begin to peel back some layers on who I was, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know,
Well,
and kind of what the path that my life would take and what it did hold, because I didn't know all of those things.
mm-hmm.
I had this idea that my life would go a certain way, and when it didn't,
Mm-hmm.
there was no plan B, there was no backup plan for me.
Well, and then you discovered your frailty as a human,
Yeah, very true.
right? Like you said your value and your worth were comprised of what you could do and what you could get yourself out of and what you could fix. And then here you certainly were in a situation that you just had zero influence over.
Right.
Yeah. Let's fast forward us a little bit into after all of that, after your worst
Yeah.
fears culminated in the hospital, and here you are like being rolled on a gurney with your butt in the air, and all of this uncertainty is happening. Tell us, fast forward a little bit to now you're out of the hospital. You have two boys at home. You have an infant
Yeah.
and a
Oh.
7 or 8 year old, I guess.
Yeah, 7.
Yeah.
Yep.
So tell us about some alone spaces you experienced there and what you learned about yourself as a single mom of two boys.
Yeah. Regardless of the moment that I had, life never stopped being challenging. I think for parents, all caregivers, and single parents, of course,
Yeah.
they understand the overwhelming responsibility that they have to care for more than one life,
Yeah. Yeah.
more than one person. If something crumbles, you almost feel like it all falls on you. And so you just never have this space to just kind of break down. And so there was this tremendous pressure to just succeed still,
Yeah.
to just make sure that I could give my children everything that they deserved.
Mhm.
And there was this guilt and this shame that I had about, the environment that I was bringing them into. And so I wanted to do everything possible so that they didn't experience any sort of, loss or hurt or pain from the situation, the circumstances that they had been born into.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And have you at any point found out that their pain is beyond your control? Have you have you had exposure to that truth at all as a single mom? That you can try, but
Yeah, absolutely. And I recognize that, and I know that we can't control, you know, what world we're born into and who it is that we're
yeah,
born to and the things that we experience and how we internalize and
yeah,
interpret those things,
yeah, yeah,
And I recognize they'll have their own things that
uh-huh,
they will work
hmm
through as they become
yeah,
adults. And so even though I think you understand that, you know, it's tough to it's tough to hold on to that as a parent because you want to do everything that you can for those kids.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
And that's a very alone space
to try to do everything for them.
to try to do everything for them.
hmm
Yeah. Be everything and do
hmm
everything.
Now, what from your previous lesson of, not having a plan and trusting God to provide you with this, delivery and birthing plan, and he worked everything out. What have you taken from that opportunity to thrive and learn that God is your provider? And now being, still being single mom who still has this aching or gnawing or nagging to want to do
Yeah,
everything. So, how are you
everything.
carrying that through in your daily life as a single mom?
You know, as time passes, it gets a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thankful for my experiences, because um, one of the things that that lesson gave me back at that hospital was some momentum,
Okay.
and what after I left that hospital, it was just kind of like I was off to the races. It was like, no longer will we settle in this one place.
Mm,
We will go after everything that rightfully we can have.
yeah.
So I remember, coming home from the hospital and applying for jobs in the South in Atlanta.
Okay.
Um, kind of landing the first job that flew me down to interview, and then moving out of Pennsylvania, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I had some family and friends that were closer in Atlanta and wanted to be close to them. Um, and I wanted my sons I wanted them to experience that. I wanted
Yeah.
them to know that regardless of your situation,
Mm-hmm.
you can still thrive. You
Yeah.
can still get up and move. You can still chase your dreams. When things change and things are
Yeah.
unexpected, you still have the ability to go after whatever it is that you want in life, because you really have nothing left to prove to anybody but yourself, is how I feel.
Yeah.
So, that lesson has certainly been like, there's a constant undoing,
Mm-hmm.
of these lessons. And I recognized of myself that, just over the last couple of years, that I experienced less joy. I wasn't able to have as much fun with my kids because I was
Yeah.
constantly worried about what I was missing, what they were missing,
Mm.
what
Mm-hmm.
we're missing out on in life by
Mm-hmm.
not being a two-income household.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Is our home big enough? Do we have a big
Yeah.
enough yard? We
Yeah.
can't have a dog in the place that we live in now. And it was
Yeah.
this, they seem trivial, but you know,
Yeah.
those things hurt, as a parent. You want to
Uh-huh.
be able to give your kids everything you feel that they deserve. But, now I know that I'm doing my best. And I know that my
Yes.
best is showing up every day
Yeah.
as a loving, caring,
Yeah.
joyful mom,
Yeah.
and giving them all of that, not bringing them home extra income, bringing them home a bonus
Yes.
at the end of the
Yeah.
month, not, you
Yeah.
know, not that. I
Right.
recognize that they need more than just material things.
Mm-hmm. What are the lessons about their worth and their value that you want to pass on to your boys becoming young men? You have one that just turned 15.
Yeah,
What is it that that you want to be certain before they launch from your nest that they know about their value
right.
and their worth?
Yeah. Pretty simply, I want them to know that they are enough.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think that was a lesson that I learned late in life,
Yeah.
that if I had understood earlier, it may have
Mm-hmm.
prevented me from going through some of the things that I went
Yeah.
through.
Yeah.
And knowing that you're enough, how do you really teach that? That's a tough thing to teach.
Well, that's my
It's something
question
that,
for you. How are you doing that?
how do you teach you? Through experience.
Yeah.
I
Mm-hmm.
think for me, what I recognize is I didn't stop to celebrate things.
Mm-hmm.
It was like we accomplished something, and it was like, like we should have done that 10 years ago. Off to the next. And
Instead of
there was this
savoring
lack
it.
of
Yeah.
celebration. Yeah, kind of savoring the
Yeah.
moment and just
That
enjoying
joy
the little
you
things
were
with them.
talking about. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So you're learning
And
to have more opportunities and be more embracing of joy.
yeah, be more embracing of joy, and then also be more celebratory of their experiences.
Yeah.
That was something that I didn't do as a kid, something that I didn't do as a young adult.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't celebrate those things because they were expected.
Oh,
So I want them to know that everything that they accomplish is enough.
yeah.
And it doesn't make me love you
Yeah.
more. I'm happy when you color inside the lines. I'm happy when you graduate, from first grade. I'm excited when something finally clicks in
Yeah.
your head and you're able to execute a football play. I'm excited for you just because you are you and I love you and you're my son.
Yeah.
And I want them to know that everything they do is enough.
Yeah. So, hey, Desiree, I have a question for you. I know that we were connected by a mutual friend, and I know you have a heart for other women, but just out of curiosity, what, besides me and maybe twisting your arm a little bit, what made you decide to come on the show?
Ooh, what made me decide? I guess I just have this, I used to have this fear of being seen, Sherry,
Okay.
right? Yeah, this fear of being seen. Didn't really want anybody to recognize me or recognize my heart, pretty much,
Oh,
because I just had this fear of being
that's
seen.
deep.
Yeah, yeah, being seen for who I was.
Yeah.
Um, and I no longer have that fear.
Okay.
I'm in a place where, like I was just telling you, I'm
Mm-hmm.
celebratory, and I want my kids to know they're enough,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just beginning to experience the fact that I am enough, and it feels like the right moment to tell the story. And
Yeah.
I also have had this, like, I know that being a single mother, being a single parent is a difficult place to be in. And I know that all of the time, all single parents, all single mothers,
Mm-hmm.
they don't thrive.
Yeah.
You know,
True.
sometimes those experiences can prevent you from moving forward,
Mm-hmm.
and they can keep you stagnant.
Mm-hmm.
They can attack your faith,
Yeah.
and
So would
create
you,
cause you to be a non-believer.
yeah, true. Would you say though that the experiences cause that or the response to those experiences causes that?
I would think it was the experience.
Okay, but in your case, your response to your experience changed your future,
Yeah,
right? You could have said, "I'll keep going through this,"
yeah.
but you changed your experience because of your response.
Changed my experience because of my response. That's very true.
I'm
I
not
never
saying
thought
it's
about it that way.
easy.
No, it's not. It's not. And I just want so many people to understand that. People are like, well, you could just make different choices. No,
It,
everybody doesn't have the ability to make those choices all the
right.
time.
Right. That's true. Yeah. So
The bottom
it's
line.
responding within the scope of available responses to you, right?
Hmm.
To those experiences.
Yeah.
And like you said, just putting one foot in front of the other
Putting one foot in front of the other. Sometimes that's all you can do. It reminds me of that scripture, like there's a time and a season for everything in
for everything.
Ecclesiastes.
Yeah.
Like there's a time to mourn and a time to dance,
Yeah.
there's a time to weep, there's a time to I don't know what the exact scripture is, but I think if we recognize that this moment isn't going to last forever. There is a
Hmm.
time when you
That's
will
good.
mourn,
Yeah.
there's a time when you will
Yeah.
have sadness, right? And
Hmm.
in those moments, you're being changed for something, and you may not even recognize what it is, but just trust that you're being changed for something for the better. And you'll have your time. You'll have your time to dance. You'll
Yeah.
have your time for joy.
Yeah.
That will come.
Yeah.
That will come.
Well, yeah, I think about it from, this is probably a scripture too, but from,
Hmm.
planting and um
Yeah.
and working on a garden, like you don't do that
Hmm.
forever. At some point,
Right.
you reap a harvest. But you also don't reap a harvest forever. It has to go back to working and
Yeah.
toiling in the soil, right?
Yeah. So true.
Yeah. And
So true.
I love what you said about just kind of putting one foot in front of the other. And I've got the sunlight now coming on, which is good because we're getting
It is
ready
good
to,
lighting.
it is good, but we're getting ready to wrap up before it's going to be right in my eyes. But today we're recording on the day that we commemorate Martin Luther King Jr.'s life.
Yes.
And I watched a speech of his this morning that I'm sure maybe I've seen, but I maybe not in my adult years. And he
Right.
basically said, I can't remember who he was talking to, but he basically said there's three things that I want you to remember. He's like, one, that you believe in your inherent dignity as a person, that you matter, right? That you don't need anything added to you or whatever to make you matter more, that you just have that inherent dignity. That's one.
Yeah.
Two, everything that you do, you put excellence to it. Like everything that you do, if you're a dishwasher, you wash dishes the best as anybody could ever wash dishes. If you're a speaker, you speak as eloquently as any speaker. Whatever it is that you find yourself doing, that you do it with excellence. And then the third thing he said is to always believe in the truths of beauty. I can't remember the second one, beauty, something, and justice. And then at the very end, he wraps that up and he says, so if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. By all means, just keep moving.
Just keep moving. Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So
that is so amazing.
It's
because
so relevant to your story.
So relevant. Yeah, it's so relevant. So relevant to a lot of people's story. And it looks different for everybody else.
Yeah.
So I love the way he ends that by saying, if you can't, what did he say? If you can't fly,
then run.
If you can't fly, then run. Right.
If you can't run, then walk.
I might fly.
Yeah.
I might fly, but maybe you
Right.
run. Maybe you walk.
Maybe you crawl.
I might be able to crawl, but maybe you're walking. And that's okay. It's not going to look like what everybody else's story looks like.
That's right.
And then you have to be okay marching to the beat of your own drum, right?
Oh, that's good. So, Desiree, you've probably already shared with us like a gazillion truths. But to close out the show, I ask every guest if there's one truth that you want the people listening and watching to remember when this show ends, what would that be?
Yeah. Really, it's to just understand that you really don't have anything to prove to anybody. The only person that you need to prove something to is yourself. So don't worry about what you've been through and how it might look to others. Begin to work on yourself, and you'll watch how things slowly begin to unfold and look up for you. And it will take time, but make sure you're trying to prove it to yourself and you're not trying to prove it to, anybody else or to the world.
What a powerful story about thriving alone that my dear friend Desiree shared. Please do connect with her. All of the links and the ways to do that are in the show notes. And share this episode with somebody that you know who needs to hear that all they have to do, all they must do is literally just keep putting one foot in front of the other and trust that God will provide for you in spades. My friends, I'm so grateful that you joined us for another episode of Thriving Thoughts. Please share this episode with a friend. If you're an Apple Podcasts user, please do rate the show 5 stars. That helps us get this message of thriving alone, that's a possibility. Thriving alone in front of other people who need to hear it. Until Friday with another solo episode from me, probably about growth, please remember to speak truth over the lies, and you will thrive in any and every circumstance.